Alex here with a video on the Sam Bankman-Fried. I guess you could call. I'm not going to do the whole trial, guys. I'm just doing two or three chunks of code some people sent me because, admittedly, at least from the code that I looked at, I would consider this to be a silver bullet. I do understand that these situations with the CEOs handling millions or billions of dollars criminal cases are a little bit more tricky than civil because there's supposed to be this well, obviously a criminal element to it. And how do you separate out a CEO who just didn't do a very good job and lost everyone's money from a CEO who very specifically and deliberately defrauded customers? And this is one of those cases. I had no idea which way it would go. I realized everybody was pissed off at Sam Bankman-Fried because I guess they considered him a genius and a hero, and he was doing all these media interviews, and so everybody thought that they would make a lot of money, and they ended up losing all their money. But having realized that, I also know how difficult it is to convict people of white-collar crimes because of what I mentioned earlier, which is how do you separate out somebody who is just not good at their job from somebody who is a criminal? I mean, that's not this country doesn't really punish business owners for just sucking at business. I mean, there's a lot of businesses that just fail and they don't end up in jail. It's these people that very deliberately choose to do things that are deceptive. It's not like, oh, I didn't know what I was doing. It's quite the opposite. You knew exactly what you were doing. You did it on purpose and enriched yourself at the expense of investors, customers, clients, etc. So I'm scrolling down. This article um, talks about how the fraud was in the code, and this is the only thing that I'm interested in. My understanding is that this was a federal case, meaning there was a camera ban in place, no cameras, and so we don't really have any actual video of the trial itself, just a bunch of secondhand information. But the code stuff that I took a look at was interesting enough that I decided to do this video. So the first thing that I'm reading here is a note to self: if you're going to write code to do fraud, make it messy and unreadable to reduce the chances it's later put in front of a jury. Yes, I'm a coder. I've been a software developer engineer for almost 10 years, graduated with a degree in computer science and engineering. This is a funny note to me because I have seen really messy code before. It is incredibly difficult to decipher what it's doing. It ends up adding a whole bunch of extra time to the accomplishment of whatever task requires you to go through the messy and unreadable code. But the reason I don't think that this is actually a very helpful comment is actually making the code very clear and readable, in my opinion, is potentially a good shield against the software developer being criminally prosecuted and convicted. I mean, if you write the code clearly and concisely, it's going to be a lot more difficult for a prosecutor to say that you knew that you were doing something wrong because you didn't try to hide anything. You just may have not understood the business end of it. You may have not understood why it was illegal. If you're a software engineer, your job is to know how to develop software. It's not to know how the financial, regulatory, and legal structure is supposed to work or anything like that. So I think I did hear that the software developers were convicted, but they were convicted on a guilty plea. And so there's no way to really know how much what I just said was taken into consideration by the prosecutors. I suppose you could look at the sentence and kind of make an educated guess, but I would not be surprised if the software developers worked with the prosecution and did not appear to obfuscate or develop or publish deceptive code. I wouldn't be surprised if they ended up getting just like probation or something. So that's an interesting thing. If somebody's aware of it, go ahead and post it down in the comments below. But other than that, I'm going to continue. So I guess this here, I wonder if I can make this larger. Give me a second. So this is the first chunk of code, and apparently one of the assertions made that was a big deal was that FTX had an account that was owned by Alameda. If you guys don't know the background, I recommend you stop this video and watch one of the documentaries on it. There's quite a few on Netflix, they're free, and then come back to the video. But Alameda, my understanding, was accused to have been given by FTX a account I don't know if I think they call it a stub account or something like that. I really don't understand fully what those terms mean, but what I do understand is that their account was special because it could go into the negative, and this line of code was presented to the jury. So apparently they had a database which listed accounts, and they had a column in that database which this was probably a boolean true or false, allow negative, and Alameda had this set to true. So this code here would only have gone and conducted these checks below if the account did not allow negative. So because Alameda's account allowed negative, it would have bypassed this check below. So what was the check that was being bypassed? Well, if you look at the next line of code, it's checking to see if there's a balance that's available ignoring collateral, and that if it is, it will ignore the collateral situation. Otherwise, it'll check to see if the balance is available. And then you can see here from the error that it's doing kind of what people would expect it to do. The account does not have enough balances. So, simplifying this into just plain English, you have an account, it's not allowed to have negative balance, and so therefore whatever you're trying to do has to be stopped, and this error is thrown saying that you don't have enough balance. One of the things that, if we go back to what I said earlier, the individual said, well, couldn't you just make this really convoluted and messy and then the jury won't understand it? First off, I talked about the problem of motive and how that exposes the developer. But second off, one thing I didn't mention is that I do believe that if this code was obfuscated, I do believe that the prosecution would have had a right to make this easier to read. I mean, like, if they're just using really funky names for the variables and stuff like that, like if balance is like the letter XT F4, if they did that, I do think that the judge would have entertained, and maybe they would have needed an expert or something to make sure that this could have been clarified. But I do believe that this code could have just been refactored by the expert, or maybe as an agreement by the parties, to actually de-obfuscate it and make it so that the variable names and such were more understandable, and potentially even refactor the code. Like if they had chunks of code that were not operative, that weren't doing anything, that were just there to be distracting. I've seen that before, where you'll have something that could be solved in like 5 lines, but for whatever reason it's ballooned into like 30 or 45 lines. Refactoring the code into something that's more readable but does the exact same thing, to me, that as a software engineer, to me there is nothing wrong with that. The code is logically working the way it's supposed to work. You've just removed the inert portions of it. You've just changed the field names or the method names, property names, all that stuff, to something that's more readily ascertainable by the jury. That, I don't see anything wrong with that at all. So if somebody did obfuscate their code, it wouldn't even matter. They would just make it legible and understandable for the jury anyway. The expert could testify on that anyway. And now you have the problem of a developer who's exposed themselves as having done something very deliberate and not really accomplished anything by it, because, as I mentioned, I very strongly believe that the code would be clarified for the jury, or they would just not even show it. They could show like some other presentation, like a PowerPoint or something. It's not like this wouldn't actually work. The idea of, obfuscating the code. So then what's down here? A later change by Wang himself exempted accounts with this flag from ever being liquidated. Okay, so I just showed you the first chunk of code, which was that the lack of sufficient balance error was bypassed when a account was allowed to be in the negatives, like Alameda's. And here's the second chunk of code. This is some kind of liquidation detector. Probably what it does is it monitors accounts to determine whether or not they are to be liquidated. And so here, what does it say? Account margin fraction is less than account maintenance margin. So it's not showing what's above this line, but what I can see here is whatever it is. So maybe what they're trying to indicate is that this account ends up getting put into this liquidating variable. And then they're showing line 41 down here, which is, and the account is not allowed, or the account not, this is like such a double negative. The account is allowed to go into the negatives. Let's just say that. So if you've got an account that should be liquidated, but for whatever reason, this Boolean flag was set to true, like Alameda's, then it would never liquidate, even if it was supposed to be liquidated. Even if the parameters and terms that are sort of the general rules that they apply to all of their accounts would indicate it's supposed to be liquidated. Whoever has this account dot allow negative flag set to true, Alameda, that's not going to happen. It's just going to bypass this as well. So two bypasses. We see the first bypass here, which is that you are allowed to have a negative balance if you have this flag set to true, which is Alameda. And then the second bypass here, which is that if this flag is set to true, then your account will not be liquidated, even if it's in the negative. So that's what these are two chunks of code. I found them to be sufficiently interesting to do this video. What else do we got down here? Oh, wow. Yeah. So the prosecutors point out that on the same day that this code was changed, that Sam Bankman. Oh, okay. So not even just that. So at the same day that this code was changed at the direction of Sam Bankman-Fried, meaning that the prosecutors had established that Sam Bankman-Fried was not only aware of this change, he ordered this change to occur. He was out on Twitter claiming that Alameda's account was just like everyone else's, which obviously it's not. Because whoever has this flag set to true is not going to be operating just like all the other accounts. Whoever has this flag set to true has special bypasses built into the code that protect them from certain things occurring. Negative balance, no problem. Liquidating this account, no, they're special. They're exempt from liquidation. So let's continue on. How are you going to resolve the conflict of interest in running your own derivative exchange and actively trading against the market at the same time? Alameda is a liquidity provider on FTX, but their account is just like everyone else's. Alameda's incentive is just for FTX to do as well as possible. So, yeah, he lied. I guess we're supposed to trust that you won't get preferential treatment on your own platform. Don't get me wrong, as a semi-quant, whatever that means, semi-quant trader, I enjoyed your videos, and FTX is a step in the right direction, but I think there needs to be a bigger discussion about this issue. Wang testified that the allow negative flag was a special privilege given only to Alameda's research. Oh, okay. Given only to Alameda Research's trading accounts. And a database screenshot also showed that the effectively unlimited line of credit that Alameda Research could dip into. So this is a database screenshot. Let's see if I can take a look at this. So that's okay. So it's showing the query. Okay, maybe they're showing here under the borrow category. This is the Alameda account, and it's apparently allowed to borrow $65 billion. Is that the maximum? No, wait a minute. Wait a minute. 1,000 million. Yeah, that's billion. They can trade futures, allow negative, use FTT collateral, can withdraw below borrow. Okay, I mean, this is somewhat interesting. It's just showing that they have this insane limit for borrowing. I guess that's what they're trying to show with that. Yeah. Wang explained that Alameda had not started out with such a high credit limit, but that periodically the trading firm had run into issues placing trades because they didn't have enough collateral. So Sam Bankman-Fried kept asking him to increase their credit limit to prevent it from happening. The limit was originally set to a few $1 million, but then it was raised to $1 billion. After they ran up against that limit, Bankman-Fried asked him to set it to a number so large that they wouldn't likely hit the limit. So he set it to $65 billion. So basically, the code is doing its job. The code is working. It's stopping them from borrowing more and more money. It's stopping them. And Sam Bankman-Fried is like, we don't want to stop them. So change the code so that it stops stopping them. What else do we have here? Oh, I heard about the fund. The insurance fund thing is another thing that they fudged with in the code. So who's AUSA? AUSA? Who is that? Is that that might be the interviewer? I don't know. Or it could be the prosecutor. Sorry, guys, I haven't been following this carefully enough to know who AUSA is. He asks, is it a real number? This is in relations to the insurance fund. Response from the coder is no. So it's a fake number. Response from the coder is yes. Was the real number higher or lower than the fake number? And the coder says it was lower. Code snippets shown to the jury demonstrate how Nishad Singh wrote some code that would update the insurance fund amount by adding to it the daily trading volume, multiplied by a random-ish number around 7,500, dividing it by a billion, making it appear as though the website was referencing a real account balance that was fluctuating as the exchange added funds. Dude. Okay. I don't know. I don't know what my opinion is on this. Like, I don't know that a developer, like, so with all the other lines of code, I don't know that it necessarily would raise red flags for developer if they don't understand anything about finance. I don't think it would raise any alarm bells to me, but this chunk of code here might. So here's where they're developing the random number. So this function here is supposed to get some kind of change. So it gets the daily volume. It's looking for okay, I see. It's looking for the change within the last day. I can tell that because it's getting the created at date of the trade, and it needs to be more recent than right now minus 1 day. So last 24 hours is what it's retrieving for the daily volume, and then when it's returning, okay, so here's where it gets it just cooks up a random number and multiplies it by how many. It multiplies by the trades in the last hour, and then it divides it. So this 1E9, I mean, that's got to be a big number. It looks like it's probably like a billion. 3, 6, 9 zeros. Yeah, one with 9 zeros, a billion. So that's what they're doing to determine the change, I guess, in the insurance account. Is they're developing, or they're creating a random number out of thin air, multiplying it by the daily volume that was traded in the last 24 hours, and then dividing it by a billion. So yeah, it's a cooked up number. I don't know. I mean, what could you do though as a developer if you're doing something like this? All you can really do is whistleblow. I don't know. I still feel like with junior developers, this would still be a borderline. Like, if they're just following instructions, I don't know that I would convict them if I was a jury. If they're following instructions and they're doing what they're told, and they're saying they don't understand that this is a problem, it might be believable, because how are they supposed to know how like insurance and all that works? But at the same on the same token, if they know that this is going to represent an account balance and it's just a random number on this, like that, I could see also swaying the jury in the other direction. Like, the developer has to know that this is going to determine some kind of account, like a real world account balance or change or something, and that if they're using random numbers, there's no way on earth that could make any sense. So I don't know. On the one hand, I kind of do. On the other hand, I kind of don't. But I guess, like I said, this software developer pled guilty. So that's not like, this guy wasn't subjected to a full blown trial. That's my understanding anyway. What do we have here? So I don't know. Oh, here's a public insurance fund change. Okay, and here's where it's getting the change. Yeah. So this is supposed to update the public insurance fund. This is another concern. Like, if a developer knows they're updating a public insurance fund and they're calling a function which up here returns a random number, this is the most incriminating stuff with regards to the software developer. Like, the other stuff with the account, like negative, bypass and all that, not so much, because there could be business reasons that make that okay to do. But the random number thing is like a flagrant. It's like definitely fake information is being published. So this is saying this. So this writer agrees with me that it's pretty damning. One could possibly explain away an inaccurate number, say one that was hard-coded into the website and never changed to reflect the true fund balance, by saying that they had correctly represented it at one point in time and forgot to change it. But it's really hard to come up with a good explanation for why the fund was being incremented by a random fluctuating number that was in no way tied to an actual account balance. Yeah. Besides, the obvious is that FTX was trying to present a falsified but convincing number to customers. Yeah. Yep. This paragraph is on point. This is probably what got the developer convicted, charged, prosecuted, and convicted. This code here. Elsewhere in the code, it's possible to observe that the amount of FTT in the fund was actually represented by a hard-coded value in the user interface and was not pulling from an external data source to get a real number. Oh, look, this is the front-end code. So they're using React. This is a React code. So their backend is Python? Yeah. Their backend is Python. Their front end is React. Well, the React is a JavaScript framework, so it's technically JavaScript. But in any event, I've seen this before. So they're showing us this is being rendered to the front end, which means, exposed to customers. Customers are seeing this portion down here at line 56 and lower. This card is rendered on screen. Like right now, what I'm looking at as I show you guys, like this is all front end code that's showing us this stuff. And at line 56 is where it starts to generate the front end code for this falsified backend code. Yeah. So it's grabbing data from this endpoint, stats./insurance fund. So stats/insurance fund most likely is what this chunk of code is returning. I mean, we can't see where the endpoint is hooked up and all that, but we can kind of figure out what they're trying to show the jury. So this calls the backend, which is the Python code. It spits back one of those fake numbers, the insurance fund, and then. So if there is no insurance fund, basically an error, it returns null. It doesn't show the user anything. But if there is a number there, which there would be a random number there, it presents it as an insurance fund to the user, viewer, customer, whatever you want to call them. Based on the coin size, shows them when it was updated too. So this number will keep changing, and it'll make it look like the insurance fund is constantly being updated. Wow, that's such a messed up thing to do. Because then it makes it seem like, I mean, without me understanding fully what the insurance fund is supposed to do, by them calling it an insurance fund, to me, as a nobody that does not understand Bitcoin or anything like that, it makes me think that this is some kind of special fund that's there to insure people just in case something goes wrong. That's what it makes me think. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. If somebody knows more, post down in the comments below. But it's kind of like, I guess I would kind of picture this like the FDIC, like the bank account, like the banks have FDIC insured accounts. And if your account is less than a certain amount, it's insured. And if something happens and the bank goes under, if your account balance is under that amount, it's insured and you're safe and you're still going to get your money. It's not going to be gone. That's my guess as to what this insurance fund is. And so to present this to the customers at being a very high number, it creates this false sense of security, like, hey, even if something goes wrong with FTT, we're okay. We're fine. This is so messed up. This is like huge. Yeah, guys, if you know more than me about Bitcoin and all that stuff, and I don't understand anything that I'm talking about, put it down in the comments below, because it would help me going forward on this kind of stuff. So I'm just reading up a little bit. Interesting. So the prosecutors didn't mention it, but Sam Bankman-Fried went to testify under oath in front of the U.S. Congress that the insurance fund paid out a net total of $9.5 million in the preceding 3 years, and that the single biggest daily drawdown from FTX.com insurance fund was $4.7 million. Huh. So apparently there was a podcast called Odd Lots. Sam Bankman-Fried lied to the interviewer, saying that the FTX's risk management engine was so good that they had never had a day where there was more money that we lost in blowouts to revenue that we made just from trading fees. Defense team only briefly questioned Wang before the court session ended, but began by suggesting to the jury that he might be saying what the government wants to hear in the hopes of receiving a lighter sentence. So the developer faces 50 years in prison? Yeah, so this is what I was saying. The developer will likely receive a substantially lower or shorter or even no custodial sentence at all due to his cooperation. They also tried to, so like, that's, I think, what's going to happen. He's probably not going to get any time in prison. He's probably going to get probation. Yeah, so they tried to, okay, they tried to explain away some stuff here. Interesting. There's a footnote here that says, why would Wang choose such a seemingly arbitrary number? 65,355,999,994. And the guess here is that he tried to set it to around 65.535 billion. The transposed 5 and 3. Because it is meaningful in computer science as the largest possible value of an unsigned 16-bit integer. I was going to say this earlier, but I didn't want to get into it because I had no idea what the maximum number of bits would be. So anyway, guys, yeah, great article. It covers 3 different areas of code where the criminality of what both the software developer and Sam Bankman-Fried Sam Bankman-Fried was doing was implicated, and ultimately he was convicted. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free to post them down in the comments below, and I will see you guys next time.